They saw a quiet temp, a woman with a blank ID and a silver thermos, invisible in the crowd. But one rainy night, 5 elite SEAL candidates cornered her. 30 seconds later, the Chow Hall was a wreck. The rain at Naval Base Kitsap was a constant, a fine, gray mist that clung to everything, blurring the sharp lines of destroyers docked in the harbor and muffling the sounds of the base into a low, persistent hum. It was October 2023, and the air carried the cold, clean scent of the Pacific, mixed with diesel and wet pine. Here, soldiers and sailors moved with a purpose born from the unforgiving environment, their boots echoing on the damp asphalt. The base was a hive of elite training, a crucible for the Navy's best, where SEAL candidates pushed their bodies and minds to the absolute limit. And then she arrived, not with a motorcade or a formal announcement, but as a passenger on a drab, gray ferry that shuttled personnel across the Sound. She stepped onto the pier, carrying a single, heavily worn tactical backpack over one shoulder. A simple white badge clipped to her jacket read, "Temporary Personnel." She moved with an unnerving quietness, her presence as subtle as the fog rolling in off the water. Her name was Clara Thorne. She was 30, with a compact, powerful build that her plain civilian clothes couldn't quite conceal. Her light brown hair was pulled back into a tight, severe bun, and a thin, almost invisible white scar sliced through her left eyebrow, disappearing into her hairline, a ghost of a wound that hinted at a violent past. Her eyes were a pale, watchful blue, constantly scanning her surroundings not with fear, but with a deep, ingrained habit of assessment. She carried no luggage beyond the backpack and a battered, unadorned silver thermos. When a young ensign offered to direct her to the civilian contractor quarters, she just gave a slight nod. "I know the way." Her voice was low, even, without a trace of an accent or emotion. She walked away toward the barracks, leaving the ensign with a strange feeling that he had just been dismissed by someone far above his rank. Her room was a testament to Spartan efficiency. A neatly made cot, boots placed perfectly parallel beneath a metal chair, and a laminated map of the base tacked to the wall. There were no photos, no personal trinkets, no sign of a life lived outside the confines of duty. On the small desk next to the map lay a single, dog-eared copy of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. She was a ghost in her own life, present but leaving no trace. Her routine was rigid and unseen. At 0430, she would already be moving through the pre-dawn gloom, her solitary figure a silhouette against the misty harbor as she performed a brutal, efficient workout that was a fluid mix of combat calisthenics and focused stretching. By 0600, she was in the Advanced Simulation Center calibrating sonar systems with a surgeon's precision. She could have remained a phantom, a quiet contractor doing her job, if it weren't for them. Caleb Vance moved through Naval Base Kitsap as if he owned it. At 25, he was the walking embodiment of privilege and power. Tall, athletic, with a chiseled jaw and the easy confidence of a man who had never been denied anything. His father was a senator, his grandfather a decorated admiral. Caleb was destined for greatness, and he knew it. He was the undisputed leader of a clique of SEAL candidates who called themselves the Apex Crew. The name was a declaration of their perceived status at the top of the food chain. There was Liam, the tech genius who could hack into anything. Noah, the silent giant whose strength was legendary. Ben, the explosives expert with a dangerously creative mind. And Jake, a former combat medic who seemed more interested in understanding human breaking points than in healing them. They moved as a unit, their arrogance a palpable force field, their charm a weapon they used to get whatever they wanted. They had never encountered an obstacle they couldn't conquer or a person they couldn't bend to their will. Until Clara. The first encounter was quiet, almost insignificant, yet it planted a seed of conflict that would grow in the damp, shadowed corners of the base. It happened in the high-tech combat simulation room, a space filled with the low hum of powerful computers and the glow of holographic displays. Clara was deep in concentration, her fingers flying across a console as she ran diagnostics on a new, highly classified sonar tracking system. The Apex crew entered without knocking, their laughter echoing in the sterile environment. They were supposed to be observing, but their presence was an intrusion. Caleb sauntered over to her console, leaning over her shoulder with a practiced, invasive charm. "That looks complicated," he said, his voice a smooth baritone. "Maybe you need some help from someone who actually knows how this stuff works in the field." He reached out, his finger aiming to touch a critical button on the screen. Clara didn't look up. Her hand shot out, not touching him, but hovering an inch from his, a silent, unbreachable wall. "Don't touch my console," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room's ambient noise with the sharpness of shattered glass. For 3 seconds, a tense silence hung in the air. Caleb, stunned by the flat refusal, slowly pulled his hand back. Clara returned to her work as if he had ceased to exist. He stared at the back of her head, a flicker of disbelief in his eyes. He had just been rendered invisible. "Did she just shut you down?" Liam whispered, a smirk playing on his lips. Caleb's jaw tightened. It wasn't anger he felt, not yet. It was a profound sense of confusion, quickly curdling into an obsession. Who was this temporary contractor who dared to dismiss him? The Apex crew's curiosity was piqued. Liam tried to pull up her digital file on the base network. Within seconds, a high-level security alert flashed on his screen, and his terminal was locked. An automated email from the base's cybersecurity command landed in his inbox. "Cease unauthorized access attempts immediately. This is your only warning." The mystery deepened. Noah watched her during her pre-dawn workouts by the misty docks, a routine of brutal grace he couldn't identify. It wasn't CrossFit, it wasn't standard military PT. It was something else, something fluid and lethal. She moved like water, calm on the surface, but with a powerful, dangerous current underneath. The whispers about the quiet woman in the simulation center began to circulate. One evening, Chief Petty Officer Gunner Evans, a leathery old salt who had seen more combat than all of the Apex crew combined, saw them watching Clara from across the chow hall. He found Caleb later, while polishing the brass casing of a decommissioned shell in the base's small museum. "Some shipwrecks are best left at the bottom of the ocean, son," Gunner said without looking up, his voice raspy from decades of shouting over engine noise. "You don't know what you're stirring up." Caleb just scoffed. "She's a civilian, Gunner. What's she going to do, file a report?" Gunner finally looked at him, his eyes like chips of sea ice. "That's the thing about the deep, Vance. You never see the real monster until you're already in its jaws." Caleb walked away, laughing. That night, in her silent room, Clara cleaned her combat boots, her movements precise and automatic. The faded outline of a tattoo, a trident, hastily lasered off but not entirely gone, was barely visible on her wrist in the dim light. These were not the hands of a technician. They were the hands of a hunter. The tension on the base began to simmer, a low heat beneath a sealed lid. The Apex crew, spurred by Caleb's bruised ego, escalated their campaign of subtle harassment. It was a game to them, a test to see when the quiet contractor would finally break. The next day, in the chow hall, Noah accidentally stumbled as he passed Clara's table. A full cup of a sticky, bright red sports drink arced through the air, splashing down the front of her clean gray shirt. The vibrant red stain bloomed like a wound against the muted fabric. "My bad," Noah grunted, not bothering to make eye contact before lumbering away. The rest of the crew snickered from a nearby table. Caleb watched, a predatory stillness in his eyes, waiting for a reaction. Clara looked down at the stain. There was no flash of anger, no sigh of frustration. Her expression remained a perfect, unreadable mask. She calmly placed her fork down, pulled a small, folded cloth from her backpack, and unscrewed the lid of her silver thermos. She poured a small amount of steaming water onto the cloth and began to meticulously clean the stain, her movements as precise and detached as if she were cleaning a rifle. She treated the act of disrespect as a simple logistical problem to be solved. To the Apex crew, this wasn't strength, it was weakness, an inability to fight back. Her profound calm was more infuriating than any outburst could have been. Their provocations grew bolder. A few days later, Clara arrived at the indoor shooting range for her scheduled time in the Advanced Combat Simulator. She found the settings had been tampered with. The hyper-realistic combat scenarios she preferred were replaced with a low-level target practice program. The enemy combatants were now brightly colored cartoon animals. It was a direct, childish insult to her professionalism. Without a word to the range officer, Clara spent 10 minutes methodically resetting the system to its original, lethal parameters. Then, she stepped into the simulator. The electronic leaderboard flashed her results afterward. A new base record for speed and accuracy. She had not only fixed their prank, she had obliterated their own high scores in the process. This quiet, efficient defiance drove Caleb to the edge. She thinks she's better than us. He seethed to his crew in the barracks that night, pacing like a caged wolf. She walks around this base like she's untouchable. No one gets to disrespect me like that. I don't know, man, Jake said, looking up from his medical textbook. Gunnar said to back off. This feels different. Different? She's hiding something, Caleb shot back. And I'm going to find out what it is. We're going to give her one last chance to show some respect. The plan was simple, born of arrogance and frustration. They would corner her in the Chow Hall, away from the eyes of senior officers. They would intimidate her, break through that icy composure, and force her to acknowledge their superiority. They called it an intervention, but it was an ambush. None of them considered the possibility that they weren't the predators in the scenario. They were the bait. Thursday night descended on the base with a cold, persistent drizzle that slicked the asphalt and rattled against the windows of the Chow Hall. The cavernous room was mostly empty. The evening meal rushed long over. The handful of sailors scattered throughout the hall kept to themselves, their conversations muted by the cavernous space and the sound of the rain. The air smelled of industrial cleaner and stale coffee. From his usual corner table, Gunnar Evans was meticulously weaving a complex monkey's fist not from a length of rope, his gnarled fingers moving with practiced ease. At 1900 hours, exactly on schedule, Clara Thorne walked in. She moved through the room with her usual economy of motion, her eyes taking in everything without seeming to look at anything. She got her tray, grilled fish, steamed vegetables, a piece of bread, and sat at her preferred table in the far corner, her back to the wall, a clear line of sight to all entrances. It wasn't a choice, it was a doctrine. 3 bites into her meal, the main doors swung open. The Apex crew entered, not as a boisterous group, but as a coordinated team. They spread out, their movements casual but deliberate, a net slowly closing. Liam and Ben flanked the sides. Noah drifted toward the kitchen exit, and Jake took up a position near the main doors, his phone held loosely in his hand. Caleb walked directly to her table, the fluorescent lights glinting off his confident smile. He pulled a chair out and sat opposite her, the legs scraping loudly against the tile floor. "We need to talk," Caleb said, his voice low and laced with false sincerity. Clara finished chewing, swallowed, and took a small sip of water from her glass. "We have nothing to talk about," she replied, her voice flat. "I think we do," Caleb pressed, leaning forward. "We feel like you've been a little disrespectful. We're elite operators here. We deserve a certain level of respect." From behind her, Jake's voice cut in. "We just think you need to loosen up a bit, Clara. Let's help you unload all that tension." The double meaning hung in the air, thick and ugly. Gunnar Evans's hands stilled for a fraction of a second over his knot. He didn't look up, but he was listening to every word. The few remaining sailors, sensing the shift in atmosphere, quietly gathered their trays and left, leaving the vast room to the 6 of them and the old chief. "Here's how this is going to work," Caleb continued, his smile gone, replaced by a cold command. "You're going to apologize for your attitude, and then you're going to show us you mean it. We think you need to learn some humility." He gestured vaguely at her simple, functional clothing. "Let's start by helping you get out of those drab things." Clara placed her fork and knife neatly together on her plate. Her posture didn't change, but a subtle shift occurred. The ambient awareness she always carried sharpened into a razor-fine focus. She was no longer just observing. She was calculating. 5 threats, 3 exits, all compromised. one potential neutral party, multiple tables as obstacles or cover. She looked Caleb directly in the eye. The pale blue of her irises seemed to grow colder, harder. "Are you absolutely certain," she asked, her voice dangerously quiet, "that this is a door you want to open?" Caleb laughed, a short, ugly sound. "Honey, we're already through the door." He nodded to Jake, who raised his phone to record. "Now stand up. Let's not make this difficult." They saw her silence as fear. They saw her stillness as surrender. They had no idea they had just kicked open the door to a cage, and they were on the wrong side of the bars. Clara pushed her chair back and stood up, her movements fluid and deliberate. There was no hesitation, no sign of fear. The Apex crew exchanged triumphant smirks. They thought they had won. "You want to see what's under here?" she asked, her voice a low, chilling monotone. She hooked her thumbs into the hem of her gray shirt. "That's the idea," Caleb said, leaning back in his chair, the picture of smug satisfaction. In one smooth motion, she pulled the shirt over her head and dropped it onto her empty chair. The air in the Chow hall seemed to freeze. They had expected to see the vulnerability of a civilian. Instead, they were confronted with a roadmap of violence etched into flesh. A jagged, puckered scar from a bullet wound sat just below her right collarbone. A brutal, thick line from an emergency field surgery sliced down her side. But most shocking were the small, deep, circular depressions that patterned her back and shoulders, the unmistakable signature of shrapnel. This was not the body of a technician. It was the body of a warrior, one who had been broken and rebuilt for the sole purpose of conflict. Jake's hand, holding his phone, wavered. Noah's eyes widened in disbelief. For the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed Caleb's face. Liam, recovering first, took a step forward, his bravado a thin mask for his unease. He reached for the strap of her sports bra. "You're not done yet," he snarled. "Final warning." Clara's voice was as cold and sharp as a shard of ice. Caleb, desperate to regain control, scoffed. "A warning? From you?" Liam's fingers made contact with the fabric. Wrong answer. The explosion of motion was so fast, it was almost a blur. Clara's elbow shot backward, not in a wild swing, but in a precise piston-like strike that connected with Liam's solar plexus. The sound was a sickening, wet thud. All the air rushed out of him in a choked gasp, and he collapsed, folding in on himself like a piece of paper. One down. Caleb lunged from his chair, reaching for her. Clara didn't retreat. She moved toward him. Her knee came up in a brutal, rising arc, connecting with his jaw as he leaned forward. There was a sharp crack of bone on bone that echoed in the silent room. Caleb's head snapped back, and he crumpled to the floor, unconscious before he landed. Two down. Noah charged from the side, a 250-pound battering ram of muscle. Clara didn't try to meet his force head-on. She pivoted, using his own momentum against him. She seized his wrist and shoulder, dropped her center of gravity, and executed a perfect hip throw. Noah was launched through the air, crashing over a table with a splintering roar of breaking wood and clattering metal. He landed in a heap and didn't move. Three down. Ben swung a wild, panic punch. Clara ducked under it with contemptuous ease, rising up inside his guard. A rapid sequence of 3 palm heel strikes to the ribs, the throat, the temple, landed with surgical precision. Ben's eyes rolled back, and he dropped like a puppet with its strings cut. For down. Jake, the last one standing, rushed her from behind, trying to wrap her in a bear hug. Clara slammed the back of her head into his nose, shattering it, then spun inside his loosening grip. An elbow to the ribs, followed by a sweeping leg kick that took his feet out from under him. He hit the floor hard, his head bouncing off the tile with a sickening crack. 5 down. 30 seconds. The entire engagement had lasted less than 30 seconds. The Chow hall was utterly still, the only sound the soft patter of rain against the windows and the low groans of broken men. Clara stood in the center of the wreckage, her breathing even, her expression unchanged. She knelt beside Jake, the last man she had taken down, and tilted his head to the side, ensuring his airway was clear. It was the detached, professional gesture of a soldier securing a scene. She then walked over to the still conscious Caleb, who was trying to push himself up, blood streaming from his mouth. He stared at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of terror and utter confusion. What are you?" he choked out. Clara looked down at him, her pale blue eyes devoid of any emotion. "Petty Officer First Class Clara Thorne," she stated, her voice flat and clear. "Naval Special Warfare Development Group. Direct Action Unit Siren. 3 tours in places you've only seen in classified briefings. My job was to go to the darkest corners of the world and hunt monsters." She paused, letting the words sink in. "You boys are just children playing dress-up." She stood, picked up her shirt, and pulled it back on. She looked at the 5 men scattered around the room. "I gave you every chance to walk away," she said to the room at large. "I changed my routine. I ignored your insults. I let you believe you were in control because I don't want this fight. But you decided that quiet meant weak." She took a step toward the exit. "That was your final mistake." As Clara turned to leave, Gunner Evans finally stood up, his half-finished, not resting on the table. He tapped his cane once on the floor, the sound sharp in the wreckage-strewn silence. "Should I call the shore patrol, Petty Officer?" he asked, his use of her rank a quiet acknowledgement of the truth he had just witnessed. Clara paused at the door, glancing back at the scene. "No need, Chief," she replied. "I think they'll call for themselves as soon as they remember how to speak." She then walked out into the cold, rainy night, disappearing as quietly as she had arrived. 10 minutes later, the shore patrol arrived to a scene of chaos. 5 of the base's most promising SEAL candidates were injured, their stories a tangled mess of contradictions. "It was a training drill that got out of hand," mumbled Noah, cradling a dislocated shoulder. "We misunderstood the situation," Jake whispered through a broken nose. None of their excuses made sense, and the one person who could clarify things was gone. The security camera footage for that specific 30-second window was, inexplicably, a corrupted file of static. The official response was swift and silent. Caleb Vance and his crew were discreetly separated and reassigned. There were no formal charges, no public disgrace, but their careers as elite operators were over. Caleb received a medical discharge for permanent inner ear damage sustained during a training accident, rendering him unfit for pressure changes on deployment. The others finished their training under a cloud of suspicion, their every move scrutinized, their once bright futures dimmed to a cautionary gray. The official incident report was classified at a level so high that even the base commander couldn't access it. By morning, Clara Thorne's room was empty. The cot was made with geometric precision, the copy of Meditations gone. An emergency leave request had been processed hours earlier, citing a family crisis. No forwarding address, no contact number. She had vanished, leaving only a legend in her wake. The story of what happened in the Chow Hall spread through the base like wildfire, evolving with each telling. She wasn't just a contractor. She was a ghost, a Black Ops assassin, a secret weapon. The new recruits were told the story as a warning. They started calling her the Siren of Kitsap, a name that was part myth, part tribute. The command never acknowledged the incident, but a new, unwritten rule took hold of the naval base. It was a simple philosophy born from a violent 30-second lesson. The most dangerous waters are often the most calm. Assume nothing. Respect everyone. Months later, at a Navy charity gala in Seattle, a changed Caleb Vance stood by the bar. His face was leaner, the arrogant swagger gone, replaced by a quiet, watchful stillness. He saw a female captain with a prosthetic leg and a chest full of medals making her way through the crowd. Without thinking, Caleb stepped back, clearing a path for her, his head slightly bowed in a gesture of sincere respect. He never told anyone the full truth of that night, but he carried the lesson in his bones. Some truths aren't learned in a classroom. They're beaten into you in a cold, rainy Chow Hall by a ghost in a gray shirt. Have you ever misjudged someone based on their quiet exterior? The world is full of warriors fighting silent battles. Respect is not something to be earned. It is something to be given. Give it to everyone, until they prove they're not worthy of it. If this story reminds you of the quiet strength you've witnessed in your own life, hit that subscribe button. And in the comments below, share a story about a time someone completely surprised you. Comment respect to honor the silent guardians among us.